Grandpa. Welcome to this week's episode where we have Jeff Goin, the author of PPG Bible, with us today. He has a website, it's footflyer.com, and on footflyer.com, he actually has a bunch of DVDs. One of the DVDs that I got was Airspace, Mastering the Airspace. There are a ton of different DVDs, plus he has the latest book out, which is number 5, edition 5. Now, edition 6 is going to be coming out sometime this year. We'll ask him about that here in just a moment. Let's go ahead and get Jeff on the phone and get this going. Going, like Jeff Goin. I love it.
Let's see. Headphones.
So welcome, Jeff, to the show. How are you doing, man?
Greetings. I'm doing very well, flying a computer keyboard.
Oh, that's always fun. I was a computer engineer for 30 years, so I kind of understand what you're saying. But talking before the show, some of the stuff that you were saying was way above my head, man.
Don't worry, it's way above my head too.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast here. This is the PPG Grandpa Paramotor podcast. We had some really good guests here on in the past, but we have Jeff Goin, and if you don't know, he is the author of the PPG Bible. I put out some feelers out the last couple of days since you said that you would be on my podcast, and I asked the questions. If you could ask Jeff anything, what would you ask him? So I got a couple pages here that I'm going to ask you from our viewers out there. Are you ready for some? You ready for some really difficult ones?
Absolutely. And by the way, the square root of 2, I only know it out to 8 decimal places.
Okay, I know pi up to 3 point that.
Yeah, no, pi. 3.1415, that's as far as I go.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, here's the most difficult question. We're going to do this one first. Jeff, what is your favorite color?
It depends on context, but I would say sunrise orange.
Ooh, I like that. I like that a lot. That's really awesome.
But on a car, it's different, and on a paramotor, it's different.
Oh, so what kind of wing colors do you like?
Wing colors, white, reddish, and gray, and paramotor, a darkish metallic red.
Okay, I hope that answers their question. What's your favorite color? I tried to, get as much information as possible. But we put this out on YouTube, Facebook, Reddit, and there's a server on Discord. So we're going to try to get through this probably within an hour. Is that about as long as you got for me? About an hour?
Sure.
All right, that's awesome. All right. The first one is, what comms or radios should I get after training?
There are so many choices that I don't have a favorite. I use Yaesu 2-meter, but you have to have a ham license for that. And I've seen some great options. For example, the helmet Bluetooth connections, those are great. So the problem is that there's so many choices that it's difficult to, and they're all pretty good. One criteria is, I would say, look at what the people around you are using and go with that.
I like that.
They each have advantages and disadvantages. The Bluetooth option doesn't have much range, but if it goes through a cell phone, that may be a better plan. Cell phones have some of their own limits. You may not legally be supposed to do it. I'm not an expert on that. But, yeah, I'd look at what the people around you are using. Go with that.
That sounds very good. I wouldn't know how else to answer that. For safety, would it be wise to have a flying buddy?
Safety always comes in degrees, and a flying buddy helps immensely in certain situations. If you're out in terrain where you might struggle to get back, or where you might fly over a river and the bridge is 20 miles away, sure would be nice to have someone nearby that could come fetch your sorry broken you-know-what. Right. And The other thing to remember, though, is when you're flying with a buddy, the chances of a midair just skyrocketed. Be careful.
Didn't even think about that.
Yeah, it only takes one. And in fact, my observation is that probably because we tend to fly only with one other person, more of the midairs have happened when you're flying with only one other person.
Interesting. I didn't even know about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Since we're talking about midair, what kind of wing? This is coming from me. What kind of wing would be the best wing to have in case there is like a collapse or something like that? And when should you get a reserve?
I would say a reserve improves your odds of survival anytime you're high enough for it to work.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it goes in degrees. If you're going to be doing steep maneuvering at either a high enough altitude or with other pilots, it improves your odds. Okay. So just think of it as, yeah, this is another tool.
How about as far as like wings, like the A or B rated wings? There's another question that I'm going to be talking a little bit more in depth. It's from Doug, but this is kind of from me right here because, when I first started, I was thinking, I'm not going to be like a Tucker guy, getting down low and skimming my feet and doing foot drags and barrel rolls and all this stuff. I want to just get up and enjoy myself and feel safe up there. I know that A wings are kind of slow and they're pretty stable, but is there any like good B wings that you could get that are stable enough to feel very confident, especially after like your first, 10 flights, maybe 30 hours?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to give specific wing recommendations only because I haven't flown enough of the newest models. And even if I did, my observation on the more that I fly, at least certified wings, is that the differences are actually pretty small. If you got into a Ford and drove it around a little bit, you got into the same class of Chevrolet or any other car, it drives pretty much the sime, and the differences are relatively minor. So it comes down to personal taste on handling. I've had good luck with ozone, but I've had good luck with a lot of them. I mean, when I go to a fly-in and I test fly these wings, it's like, yeah, that's nice. For one thing, they're usually new. New always helps. So yeah, an A wing, if you're training, you need to be on an A wing. The chances of dying on an A wing are much less because it's so much more forgiving of ham-fistedness. I started testing A wings. I gained interest after I noticed how training seems to be one of the top 3 causes of fatal accidents or phases of fatal accidents. And I wanted to make sure that not only is it an A wing, but the brakes are tied according to the manufacturer and it's of the appropriate size. Size is important because if you have too small of a wing, you're flying heavy, you can stall or spin it. If you're flying in the prescribed size, there's a reasonable chance that even if you were to reach down into your seat and forget to let go of the brakes, it's not a death sentence. So A wings for training. But your question regarded, I've got 30 flights, I want to move on. And there are quite a few B wings, I would say. I don't know that I've met one that I really don't like. There's some that maybe I don't like the handling on as much. So really your best bet is to go try it, talk to some respected people, not necessarily sellers, although sellers have good insights. But there's just too many choices to have favorites because the ones that I try, generally, I like.
Exactly. I agree with you. Now, I have a Roadster 3. It has the tip steering. It's rated B or intermediate, beginner intermediate. And this is what I've heard, and I really want your take on this. If I keep the trims in and I use the brakes and I don't use the tip steering, I believe, this is what I've heard, that the ratings, if my Roadster 3 did not have tip steering, and the trims did not go past neutral, it would be considered an A wing. However, since I'm able to pull out further than neutral and use tip steering, it cannot be considered an A wing. Therefore, it's a B wing. So if I keep the trims all the way in and don't use the tip steering, am I flying an A wing?
That question belongs to an expert on that wing. So there's a good case for going to someone who is really knowledgeable about that wing, and I'm not that guy. Because there are a lot of these wings where if they're highly reflexed, they're probably not certified with the trims out. That's kind of common.
Okay.
So if you're flying a wing with a lot of speed range in the trims, there's a good chance it's a reflex. There's a good chance it's not certified when the trims are out. You want to be really careful about using speed bar or flying aggressively.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. Here's one for you. What aspect of flying keeps you motivated to continue to fly paramotors?
People who really enjoy paramotor flying probably enjoy a number of different elements. I'm one of these who I love, and on every flight at some point I am dragging my foot through something. At some point I am doing a full power turn around something. I live on an airport, so I just love the ability to run into the air, number one, to go up to see things from 500 feet or 1,000 feet, and then to come down and plant both feet on the two yellow lines of a curvy road.
Wow.
Those kinds of things I can't do in anything else. I certainly can't do legally, and we have immense freedom on this craft and in this country anyway to do things like that fully legally. So that is a big part of what keeps me flying. I mean, I've gone through phases too, where, for example, I competed. I enjoyed seeing how far I could take it.
And when you say competed, are you talking about like an Icarus, or are you talking about like the big cones that you fly around?
I've not done Icarus. That's not my preferred kind of competition. It's really cool. I mean, my hat's off to those guys, or to the guys that fly in camp. I don't do cold. I want a thermostat, but that's awesome. So my kind of competition is precision. Anything that involves precision, whether it is pylon racing, spot landings, dropping balls, picking up cones, flying and dropping a ribbon, then recapturing it in the shortest time. Anything that involves precision, I really get a kick out of trying. Landing and stopping on something while kiting the wing overhead. All of those things have been intriguing and kept my interest. But I stopped. My last competition was 2014. Doesn't mean I'll never do one, but I'm just not actively pursuing it.
That's interesting. Yeah, I would like to eventually get into all that precision. I only have like 30 hours under my belt, and I realized that just recently have I actually played with the tip steering and played with trims a little bit. I'm kind of up in the air, pardon the pun, about the speed bar thing because it gets into that reflex and it's not as stable. I'm kind of
It's a good thing to be nervous about because I know of 3 accidents that I strongly suspect were fatal, and they were contributed to by how the speed bar was used.
Oh, that's awful. I hate when I hear fatalities in our sport.
Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with going up to a couple hundred feet and cruising around and seeing where we live from that unique perspective and being able to put yourself in a 3D location. That's awesome. If you do that kind of flying, you will likely have a long career.
And speed bar and stuff like that is with altitude. You have enough altitude, you can pretty much practice, all of your acro and speed bar without too much issue, I suppose, because you can always throw a reserve.
Well, if you do that, if you take that tact, you're now taking the safety of the reserve and using it up by increasing your likelihood of needing it. remember that a reserve ride is going to put you somewhere you didn't plan on. And that could be in water or power lines or a tree. So my recommendation is, if you want to do acro, your best bet is to find a good coach and do it over water.
Okay, that actually is another. Let me see if I can see it now. That's actually another question: is what SIV courses would you recommend? The reason why he said that he's asking is because it's really hard to find, accurate information on instructors and SIV instructors and coaches. Where would you go to find an SIV course and instructor? How would you recommend that to someone?
That's a tough call for two reasons. One is that information that I may have heard, which is sometimes, it's pretty much always secondhand or third hand, it's old. So I may have heard it from last year. So a guy who is struggling with SIV may have figured some things out by now. Right. But what I would recommend is going with someone who your peers, fellow pilots, have gone to and had good results. If you can find an SIV coach who recommends other SIV coaches, that's a really good sign. Oh. So like, I know that Chris Santacroce has an excellent reputation. If you can't do it out there, ask him. Hey, listen, I'm going to do this. I can't come to Salt Lake in this time. Do you have anyone you'd recommend instead? So if you could get that kind of recommendation, that's the most valuable. The next most valuable recommendation comes from pilots who have been there. Another one would be just to observe, do they have accidents? If there are a number of accidents in the operation, I'd be skeptical.
Gotcha. All right. Here's another question that says, what do you want to see in legislation in the next 10 years? And that goes with a lot of different questions that I've had over and over. It's like, the drone thing has been regulated to the point that it's not even fun to go first person view, because you're not even able, because of the FAA, able to go away from line of sight. So a lot of people are getting away from the drones and they're actually going to PPG. And now with the saturation with PPG, what do you think the FAA and legislation is going to happen in the next 10 years? I mean, of course, this is all speculation, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. And the main answer I would say about what legislation is none. We, as best I can tell, we have the most freedom of any country on the planet to do this legally. It is ours to lose. So, by God, let's not lose it. Let's not piss people off. I mean, we've all watched sites disappear and laws appear because somebody pushed it. I've heard this. There's no law telling me I can't do this. This, by the way, was in New Smyrna Beach. That was the last year we flew in New Smyrna Beach, because that cop, along with probably some others, said, this is what's going on down here. This is what this guy did. And sure enough, they passed the law. So we all know about the Oregon coast and what happened there, where it was lost because of some pilots who said, well, you can't tell me I can't. Well, in fact, they can. There's a lot more of them than there are of us. Right. And right now, we are operating within the law, so the best thing we can do is be responsible and not annoy people. Like, for example, you can do those foot drags down the center line of the road. That's incredible. You're legally allowed to do it. But don't play chicken.
No kidding, right?
Yeah. Don't do it on a busy road. Make sure it's empty. Make sure there's no people around that are likely to get annoyed. That kind of thing. We'll get grief from some people who just don't like to see you have fun. But so my hope for legislation is that nothing happen. I would love to see us voluntarily start using ADS-B. That's an electronic device that tells other aircraft where you are.
Yeah, I saw that. Isn't that mandatory in like all the airplanes as of 2020 now?
Yes, it is now mandatory. I've got it, and I have a couple aircraft, and I have got it in both. I've had it. It points out where other traffic is to me. That's extremely valuable. I've been flying. I've got a Beechcraft Bonanza, little four-place piston airplane, and I've been flying and have come across paramotor pilots. They weren't close. There was no risk or anything. But it dawned on me that, well, yeah, we're up there sharing the same space. Wouldn't it be nice if I could see them? So just one thing. I don't want to see a rule that requires it, but I think for those people that are going to be flying in busy airspace, if there's a way to do it, and I would look at the ADS-B solutions that are used on drones, if there's a way to do it, and I've been wanting to do it myself, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I rarely ever go high enough that I'm a factor, but still, I'd like to have it.
Is there any portable ones that you could, just broadcast, be the transmitter for with the paramotor?
Yeah, it's UAvionics. I don't know that I would tell them if I do it, it's going to be their unit. UAvionics makes one for drones. You're just buying it for your drone.
Okay, and then you just put in your...
You've got to have a 12-volt source.
Oh, okay.
And I haven't built this thing yet. I want to build one eventually, but I've got some other projects going. And I just figured I'd put it in my harness.
That's good, because you can just use a little battery pack or something, right?
Yeah, and I've had people tell me, well, you can't legally do that. Well, there is actually a function in there. I talked to one person who was a developer of it, and there is a selection for ultralight if you could get to it. I don't think the UAvionics allows you to select that, but as best I can tell, it's legal to do, just like it's legal to put it in your drone.
See, that'd be pretty good, because if it's drone worthy, then obviously it's worthy enough. And since all the airplanes now, have that, they'll be able to see us no matter what we're doing. I was flying out with my friends yesterday over at the Pinnacle Mountain here in Little Rock, and twice I saw airplanes at our level, and we weren't but 1,000 or 1,500 feet up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, I like flying around. If I've got landing areas, I like flying around down that low, just, because it's more fun to see it generally.
I'd definitely have to look into that. Is that something that you want to put in your next book?
Well, I wouldn't want to put it in there until... That probably won't be in there, only because I don't know that I'll be able to test it.
Gotcha.
It wouldn't be a bad idea to include it, but, yeah, I'd want to test it, make sure it's legal and so forth. And also regarding this idea of legislation, they don't want to regulate ultralights. They see drones a lot differently. Drones are accessible to a lot more people. They don't require skill. They're a lot faster. And in many regards, they feel like little cruise missiles, where a paramotor, he's slow, he's vulnerable. There's less need to regulate them.
Gotcha. I always wondered why there's such a heavy regulations on UAVs and not the PPGs.
It's because you don't need much skill. You are not risking your own body, and you can get to places very quickly without being, for the most part, without being seen easily. So it doesn't take much of a security imagination to think of how that could go bad.
Yeah. See, that makes sense now, too.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The more I talk with people, the more I realize things that, of course, are right there in front of me, which is one of the reasons why I want to do this podcast in the first place, is to help a lot of, newbies that are, newbie pilots that have these basic questions that no one's talking about, because most of the podcast or people out there doing videos have been doing this for, 100 hours, and they're doing all these amazing things, including SIV, and us, beginner pilots are like, well, what's an A-line? You know what I mean? So...
Right, yeah. That's good.
Yeah. Anyway, here's another one is about your next book. Any tips, tricks, warnings that you're going to be adding to your next PPG Bible, and when is the next one going to come out, and will there be a Kindle or an e-version?
Yeah, so we're working on edition 6. It's largely done. However, I'm improving chapter 2 quite a bit. I'm going to make things bigger and more clear and add a couple pages and I've already removed 2 pages from the accessories section because there was some replication in there. And I've improved the airspace section. I've had 3 revisions where I've given the first 4 pages of that to somebody to read. Somebody who says, yeah, I'm not very good on airspace. And then I go, have them read those first 4 pages. There's some more illustrations to make it more clear, to learn it how we need to know it. And then I ask them questions. I give them a test. I tell them, I'm not testing you. I'm testing me and the chapter. So I've gone through and improved it in those 3 iterations. And so I think the airspace chapter will be quite a bit better.
Speaking about airspace, I got your DVD, and that has cleared up every question I've ever had about airspace.
Yeah, awesome. Well, and I'm trying to do a little bit of that, a little bit more with that, where I concentrate on understand G and E airspace. If you understand G and E airspace and how the chart delineates them and what it means, which is all pretty simple, it goes a long way to understanding how to read the charts and what matters to us. So the longer form of that video allowed me to obviously do it very graphically for one thing, with 3D motions and so forth, but it also allowed me to explore a little bit of why it makes sense. You know, why the speed limit rules, things like that. I mentioned that in the book, but I don't have the space to dedicate to that much detail.
Now, if someone's listening to this and they're like, what there's a DVD about airspace. Now, how would they go about getting your DVDs? And I know that you have more than one DVD out there, plus your book. How would we get to your website, and how would we be able to contact you if we need you in the future?
Available now on footflyer.com is not only the Powered Paragliding Bible, but the Master PPG series. And if you're going to be flying in the air, you're in airspace, you need to know about airspace. Airspace and Law for Ultralight is your product. Okay, how was that?
That was amazing, dude.
It didn't sound like a commercial, did it?
It sounded like a commercial, but it was perfect commercial.
So yeah, footflyer.com, and there's also the instructor book for anybody who is aspiring to be an instructor. It is intended for those who have already gone through the PPG 3 training. So it's definitely not, something you get when you're getting into the sport.
Okay, awesome.
And another thing you mentioned, is it going to be in Kindle? It won't be in Kindle, but it will be an ebook. And the new one, we have made the biggest jump we've ever made in edition 6 because we've changed our publishing software, which was Quark, and now it's InDesign, and it is being made from the ground up to have cross-chapter links and be an ebook. So it will definitely be available as an ebook as well.
That's awesome. About what time period is this going to be popping out here? Sometime in 2020?
It should be by the end of the year.
Okay. So a Christmas present.
There you go. Yeah, it should be, I would say, around that time frame. I'm working on this other project, and so the timing is a little tough, but that never stops me. Thankfully, before that project got fully going, I was largely done with the reformat. So it's content. It's mostly up to content. There's always new stuff. I mean, I can't even think of it all, but I go in and I look through it, and it's like, okay, yeah, we can improve this, clarify that, make better illustrations, or, oh, yeah, there's some new information, or, yeah, we maybe not need to emphasize this as much. So I am amazed myself. I think after I did edition 5, there won't be any more new edition. This is it.
Interesting. Now, let's just say that somebody's out there and like, wow, I can think of a way that, Jeff could change this. Is there a way of getting up with you and maybe giving you their perspective or recommendations?
I always appreciate input. My agreement with people who give me input is, number one, it's all valuable. I don't care if you've had 5 flights or 1,000 flights. I'll always look at it. The other is that I may or may not use it. There's only so much room. I can only do those things that are, valuable enough that I think that other pilots will be able to get here, and it makes more sense to put it in the book than to just put it on FootFlyer. The way to contact me is to go to footflyer.com. There's a contact page there. That's the best way.
Awesome. That's great. Here is a next question. It's from Sean Dorr. If y'all been out on the internet at all, Sean Dorr is everywhere, and he's going to be taking his classes sometime this summer. And his question is, I assume, after going through, instruction, he asks, what advice would you give someone about to take their first solo?
Ooh, that is a surprisingly risky time. That first solo flight is really risky. And number one, if you have not been in a simulator with an instructor, I would say running the motor that's tied down safely and who has gotten you to the point where you can respond automatically to commands. Number one. Number two, you are good at handling that wing. Being able to ground handle indicates success in flight. I don't even understand why some of that is true. I understand why it's really obvious why some of it is true. And that's because there's a lag that happens with the control input of our craft. And if you're good at ground handling, you have automatically learned a little bit about that lag and about how the wing handles. So it's not just like something that instructors say, oh, you should be good at ground handling just because. No, I've observed that you're less likely to die if you get to a high level of ground handling before your first few flights. There's some pendular behavior about our craft that is particularly risky, both with the throttle, the fore-aft pendulum, and the left-right pendulum. And if you don't master that as best you can, and another one is a tandem. Get a tandem flight in something before you go solo, preferably something with hand controls and a paraglider. A wheel tandem is okay. A foot launch tandem is better a little bit, but really it doesn't matter. A wheel tandem is, as long as you're under a hand-controlled paraglider, is really good. With an instructor that knows what he's doing, where he gives you the controls, he shows you how you get into and how you stop pendular swinging, both left, right, and fore-aft. Like you throttle up. So those are some things that hopefully you have already done. If you're about to do your first solo, you're thinking, well, it's too late. Well, okay. I'm just telling you my observation. In 2015, there were 2 fatalities. Both of them at least involved, they were both under radio control, and they at least involved this type of pendular action. Those 2 fatalities are what inspired me to write the instructor book, because there are some best practices on instructing that are not always followed. Being certified does not mean you will follow those practices. It means you've demonstrated competency and you've been exposed to those practices, but it's still up to the disciplined instructor to employ them. That was a lot of words, but this is an important topic. And another one is be on an A wing with correctly tied lines and within its advertised weight range.
I'm glad you just said weight range. I have heard a lot about people wanting to go heavier than their weight range because it makes it more stable. Can you really quickly go over what happens when you go over and under a weight range on a wing, please?
It's like adding a lot of weight to a car. It has an effect. Will the car suddenly break with that much weight? No. You could probably put 5,000 pounds onto the car. It'll bottom out the suspension, but until you hit a bump, it'll work. So being heavy on a wing doesn't make it immediately dangerous. Being light on a wing doesn't make it immediately dangerous. Each one affects it in certain predictable ways. If you're heavy on the wing, it will be more responsive to control input. It will be faster in the air. It will take longer to take off. It will climb slower. It will leave you more susceptible to pendular roll oscillations. And the controls will respond quicker. So 2 inches of travel will cause more roll rate. If you're light on the wing, all of those things are backwards. And also, if you're heavy on the wing, it is less likely to fold, but it's going to be way uglier if it does fold. If you're light on the wing, it's basically the reverse of all those things. And in addition, and very significantly, it will collapse easier. It takes less air, less downward flow at the leading edge to cause a collapse. So that carries its own risk.
Interesting. I know a lot of people are saying stay at about 75% of the wing. So if it's rated, between 100 and 200, stay at about 175. I'm just giving, a number out there. But what do you think about, staying at about 75, or do you think 50% would be better? What do you think is the best for the wing?
I don't have a number for it. And part of the reason for that is that it probably depends on the wing. I don't like to make declarations without data points. I don't have any data points. My observation is that those are good numbers. There's nothing wrong with those numbers. That if you're in the middle of the weight range, that's a good place to be. As you get heavier, the characteristics change like I described. Same for lighter. So there's nothing wrong with those. If it's a certified wing and you're within the weight range, the middle of it is a good place to be.
Well, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Thank you for clarifying, and hopefully that will clarify and help some people out there when they, decide to get a wing for the first time, or to, upgrade because they're getting heavier, or go to a smaller wing because they are losing weight. And kudos to you losing weight.
For a new pilot who doesn't have a wing and is getting training, there's a big benefit in buying what the instructor is used to, because he's used to training on it. So there's a good chance he'll be familiar with its handling characteristic. So
that makes sense.
It's not just that he needs the money, it's that he'll be familiar with it. So, the motor, the wing, that's why I think there's a lot of value in buying equipment from the instructor if he's familiar with it.
Good advice. It seems like a majority of the things that we talked about today anyways is ask your instructor.
There's a lot of value to that. If you have a trusted instructor who you trust to give you good advice based on your needs, if an instructor sells only one brand and all of his solutions are that brand, regardless of your weight or anything else, you're probably not getting the best advice.
Gotcha.
If that brand has a wide range of options and weights and so forth, you have a better chance of good advice.
Now, since this sport is not regulated and you're not required to go and get instruction, you don't need to get an instructor. You can pretty much just get something on eBay and, try to get up in the air and YouTube self-train yourself. But let's say that, you're a little bit more on the, I want to be safer side and get an instructor. Where on the internet do you go to find people that are qualified to actually be an instructor to instruct you? Is there a website out there?
Well, USPPA.org is the best source for that, because now you can at least get somebody who has met certain minimums. There are other really important considerations, of course, because just because you're USPPA certified, it's like the same thing. It's not required. It's voluntary, just like scuba. For anybody who knows anything about scuba diving, they're familiar with PADI and NAUI. Those are organizations that certify instructors. And it's the same thing. You go to an instructor, that just means they've met qualifications. They've probably agreed to certain things and hopefully are using the training program. But are they? Nobody's actually necessarily watching. So you might want to find out. Okay, so he's USPA certified. Does he use the syllabus? So find an instructor that is willing to give you a rating and he uses the syllabus. And if an instructor is willing to give you a rating without using the syllabus, report it. That's the only way anybody can find out that someone's abusing that program. Using the syllabus is valuable because it avails the instructor of essentially a checklist. Airlines use checklists for very good reasons. They help avoid accidents. The accident that will happen will be yours. So you want an instructor that avails himself of the best possible program. Won't make him a good instructor, but at least it covers one of the bases. Do they emphasize ground handling? You know, you need to be like the ratings require you to be able to kite for a couple of minutes steady, which is really a pretty minimum requirement. So my advice would be to start there, that he's certified, that he uses the program, goes through the syllabus, and then try to find pilots in the area who make recommendations, because, you know, they'll know who has a good reputation rather. And that's at least as good information.
Yeah, I know that my instructor said he wants to see me reverse inflate, have it above my head, walk back 10 feet, turn around, walk 10 feet, turn around, walk backwards 10 feet, then turn around and walk another 10 feet, all with maintaining my wing directly above my head with complete control before he put me in the air for my first solo. What do you think about that?
Awesome. That's absolutely awesome. Takeoff shouldn't be an accident.
Exactly. But anything else about that? Because we got another question coming up.
Boy. Well, that's all I can think of. I'm sure there is plenty because it's an important question. But
that's
all I can think of the most.
But that's why you got a book out there. And like I said, make sure.
Oh, and also footflyer.com. I've got a lot dedicated to this question. What am I looking for in an instructor? The whole of chapter 1 is intended for someone getting into the sport. And what do I look for in an instructor?
So y'all out there, go to Footflyer and check out the website. Matter of fact, there's actually something on here. I don't know if it's true or not. It says, Jeff, your last review was 3 years ago. Any plans on more Footflyer reviews?
Well, I would love to do more reviews. The problem, of course, is I've got myself in a new business startup trying to change the world in another arena of aviation. I'll go into that in April sometime. But right now, that is consuming an immense amount of time. So reviews, to do well, a review takes a while. I mean, I'm a big fan of objective data. You want to know how fast it is, how well it turns, how it inflates. And that's hard to do unless you go out and you have a wing for a week. I remember reviewing one wing that I really liked, but I never flew it in a calm wind. I flew it a couple times, and there was always at least a couple mile-an-hour wind. Well, there's some wings out there, including this one, where if it's dead calm, it weirds out.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, weirds out. I got one of those.
So that's the scientific terminology, is weirds out?
Weirds out. Yeah, you'll find that there in Scientific American if you look hard enough.
I hear you. All right, sounds good. Doug, he's a friend that came up and flew with me yesterday. We did some geocaching, or as Anthony Vella calls it, paracaching. So I've been doing that with some friends, and he came up from Louisiana, and he has a question for you. When it's bumpy or windy or turbulent, when do you use trims set out to neutral or beyond, or keep them all the way in? And when do you use tip steering?
Well, I'm going to defer to my previous statement about it's really important to read the wings manual. And I know that sounds like a cop out, but here's why it's so important. On one wing, the manufacturer has found that they feel that the best way to penetrate turbulence is trims out, tip steer only. You're basically giving up handling for to let the wing's own reflex stability handle it.
Right.
Another manufacturer will say, no, your best bet is to pull the trims in and use main brakes and use active flying. But then you have to say, well, what is active flying and am I good at it? Because that's a specific answer. It's not just holding weight on your brakes. It's stopping or reducing, never stopping. Don't think that you have to, completely stop it, but it's reducing the amount of motion that the wing does. And the problem is that's harder than it sounds. How do you know you can do it? Because you can fly a straight line in light turbulence at 2 feet or in that area. And it's the kind of thing you have to practice. You have to be able to roll out of turns with no overroll, where you're rolling out of the turn and you bring it level without the wing going beyond level. That's common in a paramotor. If you just let off the brakes, the wing, you'll roll out of the turn and roll a little bit into a turn in the other direction, and then the other direction, back and forth in decreasing amounts. To be an active flyer, you need to have mastered that to the point where you're not doing those roll oscillations anymore. Pitch oscillations. You know how you're handling pitch oscillations if you're in light turbulence at 2 feet? You know how you can tell? You're not hitting the ground.
Right, because hitting the ground is pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, you won't get hurt. So my recommendation is assume that you're probably not doing active flying very well, unless you've practiced this kind of thing where in at least light turbulence. And you never want to take on strong turbulence because, well, it's strong turbulence and there's a decent chance it'll have its way with you. But in light turbulence, put yourself in a situation where you need to keep the wing essentially overhead, using the least amount of brake pressure and throttle input to keep your body more or less underneath it and the wing more or less above you. So that is, I know, again, kind of a long answer to this question, but it's why when they say do active piloting, well, you probably ought to know what that is, because the term gets tossed around and people don't really appreciate what it takes to do it, because it takes a while to get good at it.
Exactly, and also the bump tolerance and how bumpy things are, because you have a scale for bump, and bump goes from 1 to 10, I believe, and 1 to 4 is aggressively getting bumpier and bumpier without a wingtip collapse or a wing collapse. 5 is when it collapses in the bump. So I believe that what Doug and I experienced is probably a 4, because I don't think that there wasn't any collapse. So where is that bump tolerance or the scale when people talk about how bumpy things are? It's on your foot flyer, right?
Yeah, it's on Foot Flyer, and it tries to be objective. It says an A wing uncorrected. So in other words, you're flying with your brakes up at the pulleys. You're not doing anything. And if you're in 5 level turbulence, you're getting little tip collapses on that thing. That's nasty air.
Wow.
I don't want any part of that air because it's no fun. Not worried about it. I would fly in it. I would feel comfortable flying in it. But it's nasty air and it's just no fun. Then a 7 is where you're taking a 50% or more collapse on that beginner wing. That's really dangerous air. So that's how the scale is built. And then 8, 9, 10 are just,
ridiculous.
Worsening versions of that. Yeah, they're to the point of uncontrollability, where 10 is, it doesn't matter what you're doing with those little brakes. You're going to get turned into laundry.
Wow. And about what wind speed is that?
Oh boy, that is all over the map. I've been on beaches frequently where it's blowing 20, and no problem if you've practiced high wind handling. Because for one thing, just to get the wing to inflate in that condition, without inflating before you're ready, you got to build up to that. And you got to have a situation where you can get dragged and you're not going to get strained through a fence or something. So on a beach, in many conditions, yeah, you go in 20 mile an hour and it's fine.
Because it's all laminar wind.
It's more or less laminar, yeah. And if you're in a area where there's big trees around it, I live on a little airport where there's a runway. It's a grass strip, north-south grass strip. And if I have 12 mile an hour out of the west, I don't want to be in that air because it's curling over those trees and the buildings, and it is all shades of nasty. So it depends quite a bit on the location. If you're out in the middle of a field, the St. Johns River is a common flying site around here in Florida, and there's a bunch of flat land. You can pretty safely fly there. If you're a PPG 3 level guy, you'd be fine flying there in a 15 mile an hour wind.
The strongest laminar wind that I have taken off in is about 10 miles an hour, and to me that was right at my tippy top tolerance as of right now as a newbie pilot. I can't imagine trying to take off into anything higher than that. I had to pull trims out to neutral just to make sure it didn't overfly and collapse on me. Took like 3 steps and I was up in the air. But honestly, I can't imagine trying to take off in 20 mile an hour wind on the beach. That sounds scary, which kind of leads us up to the next question is, what is your scariest flying moment?
Oh, that's easy. Panama. We were in the country of Panama. It was really windy. One of the guys, an experienced pilot, couldn't even get airborne. And there were 4 of us, then there were 3 of us, but I had already begged off of this flight, and then I got talked into it.
Oh, no.
Yeah, one of the guys handed me the phone and let me talk to the local pilots, like, oh, yeah, we get this condition a lot, but it's fine at the LZ. All right. And I had already said, you know what, I'm going to ride in the truck. I'm going to ride this one out. So we get there, and it was blowing really hard. One of the guys on the radio said, this looks like a bad idea. Silence.
Whoa.
Yeah. So we get on the other side of this mountain, and all hell broke loose. And that wing was in places where no wing should be. We each took a different tact on how to handle this. One of the guys went down really low. The wind was angling offshore. Had he gone down, had he had a motor failure, we never would have even found the remains.
Wow.
Because he went down to about 20 feet and came inland that way. Oh, yeah, had he taken a collapse down there, it wouldn't have happened. I went and I tried. I did some spirals. The problem was we couldn't get down.
What?
We were in a form of standing wave, severe turbulence, standing wave, and I would do a spiral, which I hate spirals. I don't deal well with high Gs. And I would lose, say, 500 feet. It wasn't a nose-over spiral, but it was really steep. And I came out of that spiral, and I was going up 700 feet a minute again in big ears. Yeah, big ears just pissed it off. So I don't do beelines because I'm not used to them enough. So after a few of those, I headed downwind, just went with it to get farther away from the mountain. And I just fought it and fought it and fought it until I landed. And that was the scariest moment in aviation ever.
Wow. What kind of advice would you give pilots to make sure that they don't fall into what you just went through in Panama?
Well, the first is pretty obvious. If you see a pretty obvious risk, uh, just say no and stick with your guns. Another one is, just because everybody did succeed and flew successfully that day doesn't mean it was safe. They may have just barely made it. So, I write this column for Powered Sports Flying, and that column is written firmly to me.
I got a question. Are you still there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I got a question about apps. So I know that you got to check winds aloft, and you got to be careful about wind shear and different gradients of wind. So what apps do you use, or websites, to check the winds aloft or check the weather before you go on a flight? And how often do you check them before you actually take off?
I try to do an official briefing, but that's partly because I'm an airline pilot, and if something happens, I'd rather have it be on record that I did a briefing before I flew.
Oh, okay.
But as far as, that airplane type briefing, it's good for making sure there's no TFRs, temporary flight restrictions. But for the winds, I use this thing, Windy TY. That's real helpful. And otherwise, I don't use much. I've observed that, I'm sure there's some great apps, and someone else is going to have some better apps than I have. But I've observed that it's pretty easy for little miniature jet streams to form in places where nobody predicts they'll be. Sometimes they're predicted, but at maybe, you've probably seen this, I don't know, where you take off and it's calm. You just did a forward launch, you ran your ass off, you get airborne, and it's like, oh, look at that. I'm not moving much. You climb up a little bit more. Well, look at that. I'm moving backwards. Perfectly smooth. But you fly hands off at 20 miles an hour, and you're going backwards very slowly, but you're still going backwards. You know it's 20 plus miles an hour, and you're only 300 feet high. So that happens. And when that stuff hits the ground, yeah, it's going to be a sporty air ball down low. So it's one of those things, if you're going on across country, you may want to go upwind first so you can get back quickly, or be willing to just land early.
Gotcha. Have you heard of the Ryan Carlton website for hot air ballooners?
I have not heard of that one, but ballooning, I have seen another ballooning website and thought, oh yeah, this would be good. So you probably have a better one than I do.
I also look at Ventusky app. It's an app that shows the different levels and which way the winds are blowing. One of the things that scares the crap out of me is wind shear and seeing my wing just collapse and me fall to the ground. There's one video out there that the guy's just flying around having a good time, hits this wind shear, and it just drops him. And that scares the crap out of me. He went through in his description and said that if he would have looked at winds aloft, it said at 300 or 500 feet there was a crosswind that was like 20 miles an hour in the different direction, and he thinks that he hit that. Is that one of the things that you look for when you do your briefing, is winds aloft and different shearing effects?
If it's bad enough that you're going to have that kind of shearing, you usually get gusts in the terminal area forecast. So later in the day, you'll see it show gusty in the terminal area forecast. So that's what I look at.
Okay.
Another observation is that if it's going to be bumpy, I'm not saying that he was wrong at all. I'm just saying that in general, I feel it pretty early on, and usually it's because I push it. In other words, I don't take the hint that, oh, this is some kind of bad air that wasn't predicted. I should land right away. My observation about most of those types of accidents is that people had a pretty good clue that the air was bad. and they continued. So I've actually never seen a situation where he got swatted out of calm air. Not saying it can't happen, but it's pretty rare. And usually there was some indication prior to the incident, because it's actually pretty hard to collapse these wings. It takes a fair amount, unless you're pushing some things.
Unless you're probably in the reflex or pushing bar or something, because his video was, relatively long before it happened, and he was just tooling around. It looked like a nice day, no oscillations, no craziness, and then all of a sudden, whoosh, the wing just collapsed. I think that he had a chase cam too, so we saw a couple of different views, which
That'd be interesting to see. Yeah, send me the link.
Absolutely. What do you think about chase cams?
Cool. When I was doing instructional videos, I found they weren't steady enough for my use, but they provide cool footage just for entertainment, and would also work for training in the right use. So I have not used one regularly. I tried it, but when I was doing a lot of filming, I was building training videos. So I had the camera mounted out to the side or on the cage where you could clearly see the hands, and I was looking for an action and reaction. You do this, then this happens, and I want to show it to you. So I came up with a camera mount where the camera was looking straight down. I wanted to show torque, the torque effects, and oscillation and yaw. Because there's some weird effects of that where many wings will oscillate, and they oscillate and yaw.
Is it dangerous to mount cameras on your wing from your different connections on your lines?
Absolutely. If you let that camera catch on something, that could go very poorly. So, but like all of these things that we choose, we'll choose a risk and benefit. Mm-hmm. And as long as you're not flying in areas where that's a possibility, the risk is minimal. There is some more risk, because if you do take a collapse, well, yeah, okay, that could get in the way. So it comes in degrees. If you're taking off and flying in relatively benign conditions where a big fold is unlikely, risk is minimal.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's all risk and reward. As long as you understand all the risks and all the rewards when you're flying, I guess that's good. And that's another reason why, I believe that having instructors and having buddies to fly with, and other people around, and people that you can talk to, other groups and things like that online, possibly even fly-ins, which leaves us with, I believe, our last question. Do you know of any good fly-in websites, to be able to hit these fly-ins that are going around?
Well, we try to get all of them on USPPA. They don't have to be USPPA specific in any kind, but so we try to get them all on USPPA.org. There's a calendar there where if we know about it and they allow, like, we'll ask, and there are sometimes fly-ins where, we don't really want to publicize it that broadly. Okay. But most of them are okay with it, and we'll put it up on there.
Are there any dangers about these fly-ins and a bunch of pilots that you would recommend to newbie pilots going to one of these fly-ins?
Well, they're obviously high target area for mid-airs. So if you're smart about it, I don't think it's a big deal. I wouldn't be inclined to do one of my first few flights there. Unless it's a wide open area. I'm going to be at the Palm Bay fly-in. I forget, they renamed it Florida Fun Fest. And that's a big enough open area that it probably doesn't matter. But when you're a beginner, there's a lot going on. And so it may be better not to do a lot of flying at the event, but
It's good to meet people, I suppose, and
it's awesome to go, absolutely, and meet people. And if you go to an event like the Palm Bay one, well, you can go away from the main activity and fly there. But when it's crowded like that, you're just adding a new layer of complexity that you're less able to handle well.
Especially if you're a new pilot, just trying
That's
to.
what I mean, yeah.
Okay. One last question. How did you get into flying PPG, and how long have you been flying?
I got a fateful call from a friend in 1999 who said, "Hey, Jeff, have you ever seen this powered paraglider?" What? And he told me a little bit about it. He asked, "You want to go in with me on one of these things?" And I already had other flying things. And I told him, "Well, let me look at it. I don't know anything about it." I kind of envisioned it being like the guy who flew over LA in a lawn chair. I didn't figure there was that much control over it. But when I found out how much control there was, I just went nutso. Cool. Nutso. This was the way I always dreamed about flying. So yeah, I went out and got training. That was in 1999. I think it was March. And the rest, oh my God, I went nuts. I couldn't stop. I would leave the house so I would get out before visitors could show up. It was definitely out of control.
So you got up early and flew, late and flew every chance that you possibly had.
I lived on an airport. So I would still go somewhere else frequently to fly. But the fact that I could run into the air with this craft and go to the anywhere of my whims was utterly compelling.
That is awesome. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many people are looking into the PPG. Man, we've crested over an hour, and I totally appreciate your time coming on the podcast. If you have like 2 seconds, I'm sure that everybody is just waiting to hear this. Airspace. I know I listened to another podcast. I think you're on Anthony Vella's, and he asked you really quick to sum up the airspace, and you did it so quickly. I'm like, could you do that for me? G airspace up to 1200, E airspace above that, and what would you say, like a mile of visibility and clear clouds? Can you go over that real quick? I know it's like 2 minutes out of your time.
I think you just did it.
I think so too, but you say it more eloquently than I do.
Oh, there's a guarantee I'll screw it up. All right. Well, the basics are thankfully really basic. So almost anywhere in the country, you're launching in G airspace. G for ground. You're going up to either 1,200 or 700 feet. You only need a mile and clear of clouds. Throw a dart at an airspace chart. It's landing on G airspace, almost certainly. You're standing in G airspace. You need a mile and clear of clouds. We got that. Right. Then the next thing is above 700 or 1,200 feet, you need more. You need more cloud clearance. You need more visibility because the airplanes are flying faster. How do you tell the difference? On charts, you've got this shaded magenta outline around airports and highly populated areas. Inside of that shaded magenta outline, the G goes up to 700 feet. I'm sorry, outside of the outline, it goes up to 1,200. Inside of the outline, it goes up to 700. And above that, above 700 or 1,200 feet, you need 3 miles visibility and more cloud clearance, 500 below, 2,000 at the side, and 1,000 above. That's really about it.
And that's what I've taken from your DVDs and listening to you on other podcasts, is that we only need to worry about 2 things. You know, G airspace up to 700 or 1,200. Above that, it's 1,200 to 18,000 feet. I mean, right. we have such an amazing amount of range to go fly, and as long as we stay away from airplanes, we're doing pretty good.
Right, exactly. And you need, if you're in a populated area, there's other airspace types that we're not allowed to go into. But those are actually pretty small considering the whole of the country.
Exactly.
I mean, we have to avoid the congested area of a city, town, or settlement. Well, what does that mean? We can't fly over it. Well, it means you can't fly right over it. So if you've got a park, you can fly within the confines of that park. And I've done that in Chicago. It was in Chicago.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can pretty much fly anywhere. Man, once again, thank you so much for being on this podcast. This has been absolutely amazing. Y'all go to Foot Flyer, get that DVD that tells you all about airspace and all that. Pick up his book and make sure that you get on the list for a Christmas. What is it? The number 6?
Number 6.
6 for Christmas. Man, have an awesome day. I so appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, no problem, man. You do the same. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you out there for listening. This is paratalk.org, paratalk.org. This is for the people, by the people. Do you want to be interviewed? Have you interviewed someone, or do you want to just tell your story about how you got into PPG or paragliding? I mean, we're all about flex wings or anything, even GA, I suppose. If you have a good story about general aviation, how you got into it, being a pilot, that's what this is all about. Let me know. You just get up with me. You can email me at ppggrandpa@gmail.com. Check out all my videos that I have out there, which is ppggrandpa.com. And I put it all out there, all before I started to fly, and training, and of course my first, sitting down too soon and smacking my butt and coming in for landing too quick and not landing right, turtling. This last one, I didn't check my runway and got into some mud and water and kind of did a little crash thing. But the good thing is that I don't have to worry about my cage breaking because I have an Angel frame. Andrew Fuller makes the Angel frame. He guarantees it, so if you break it and mess it up, he sends you out free pieces, which is awesome. The only stipulation is make sure you get it on film so he can figure out how you broke it and make the frame better. Get up with Andrew Fuller at skytappparamotors.com and tell him that PPG Grandpa sent you, and he will actually take off some money, I think $200 off a complete setup, and you never have to worry about frame parts again. I think it's pretty cool. That's why I fly the Angel. I beat the hell out of it, and I can still fly. Go to iTunes, please, if you enjoyed this episode, and rate us a 5-star. We're also on Podbean and numerous other places that are supporting the podcast RSS feeds. Have a wonderful day. Thank you again for listening, and we will catch you next time.